Hey everybody, Happy New Year. Hope you have a great 2021. It certainly can't get any worse than 2020. This is Joel Stephen coming to you live from my new home studio, which I put together recently. And I'm going to take you through some songs off my latest record called Imaginations Volume 2. And I'm going to take you through a couple of the techniques and practices I use when I record. And we'll spin through a couple of the songs and see what you think. Before we get going, let's do a quick look around the studio and see what we have to work with. The main recording platform is Pro Tools 12. I also have a Euphonics MC Control for working with individual tracks and automation. The Apollo Twin is what I'm using for my interface. I've got two separate near-field monitors. The mainstay are the Dynaudio BM5s, which are just fantastic there on the right, and a Summit Audio signal path. Mic pre's, DI's, tube EQs, and a headphone distribution amp by Rane. I've treated the room with diffusion and absorption all the way around. In my spare closet down here, I put in a vocal isolation booth. Got sound diffusion, vocal microphone, headphone run, and an iPad for reading lyrics. And I have a guitar amp in there as well. My mainstay, which I get some great sounds out of, is an old Crate Class A all-tube amp, guitar synthesizer and Boss Effects, my Harkey bass rig, and the original Crate. There it is. So cool. I find it helpful to have a lot of different options for sounds. The best way to do that is to have several guitars and instruments to choose from. So I've got a couple different basses, several different electric guitars, and a couple acoustics. So that's a little peek around the studio. If there's one thing I'd like to stress more than anything, it's that you don't need a lot of fancy gear. You don't need a lot of guitars and all that stuff. I bought all this stuff over the course of a long time and I collected it, but there's a lot of affordable recording options out there. You can get sound diffusion and inexpensive gear at Guitar Center or on the internet, so I just encourage you to record. Now, with all that being said, let's actually get into making some music. Now, you also won't get too far without some inspiration, and for that I like to go to my old standby. Tasty. So once I get the song finished, completed, and lyrics written, and pretty much the way I like it, I go ahead and start the session by adding a click track that matches the tempo. And then I build the drum part. Now, I actually started playing drums when I was 16 years old. But the problem was that I moved around a lot. I always had roommates or lived with family or somebody. I couldn't be loud. And I was pretty good at composing drums, but I really never had a good place to record them. Recording drums takes an engineer. It takes a lot of microphones. It takes a lot of finesse and technique, and more than anything, time, and a good sounding room, and I didn't always have that. So years ago I started using drum samples, and what I would do is pick up a pair of sticks and play the part just the way I would normally play it on a drum kit, and then I would chart it out and actually write the parts in MIDI, and then use that MIDI track to trigger samples that I've created and built from various drum libraries. So what you're seeing here is the actual MIDI tracks. Now, what I usually do is I build each instrument part by itself. So I'll have the kick drum part on one track, the snare drum part on one track, the hi-hat, etc. That allows me to shift them around in time and give it a human feel. It also allows me to output every separate track to a separate sound, and that way I can manipulate the sound afterwards. So that's the way I do it. There are certainly much simpler ways to do it. A lot of people use loops. I do all of these by hand because that's the way I learned to play the drums, and that's the way I think it sounds most realistic. So the first thing that I do is select the drum kit I want, but it doesn't really matter with samples. What's great is you can change the sounds anytime you like to fit the song. So I'll start out with a kit that I've used before in BFD2, a nice kick drum sound, snare, cymbals. Okay. Then what I do is I use MIDI mapping here, And as you can see, I have just built track by track all the MIDI events. I've got kick, snare drum, hi-hats. I can solo this drum kit. Okay, so now that I have the basic format laid out, I've got a click track, I've got my drum part written out. I'm going to go ahead and use a guide track by laying down the guitar part. I'll often use pre-production techniques, meaning I don't worry about the engineering a lot, I don't worry about the sounds a whole lot. I just go ahead and lay down a guide track, or a scratch track as I call them. And that gives me a template in which to maneuver some of the parts around and see which parts work, which parts don't work. And I'll often go back I'll always go back and change those and replay the song, concentrating on the performance. But for starting to arrange the song, I'll just kind of plug in and get a good sound going and lay down a guide track for me to sing to. I'll do guide tracks for vocals, guitar, and bass. Once I get the song laid out, then I go ahead and do the final recording of the actual parts with the sounds that I like. Let's go ahead and get some of the initial tracks going. I'll take you through what I use as a signal chain, just in case you like gear like I do and you want to pick up some nice sounding gear. But let's go ahead and lay some tracks down and see what we can get. So whenever possible, I use tube electronics. I bought this Summit Audio Signal Path. I've got a tube DI, I've got a tube compressor, tube EQ, and I go into my Apollo interface from my Summit Audio gear. Get my gain going on my preamp. 3 to 5 decibels of compression is usually pretty good. So I'll use the same signal chain whether I'm doing a scratch track or whether I'm doing the actual final performance. So now that I've got the compressors set and the preamp all ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and lay down a scratch track or a guide track. So I have my guitar guide track laid down, and I've reset up my compressors and signal path for the bass guitar. Now I'm going to go ahead and lay down the bass guitar, and this is a pretty fun part. We're going to get into the rock part of the song. You'll see how it all builds up. Now that we have the basic rhythm track built up, got a guide track for guitar, I'm going to go ahead and lay some synthesizer parts. I bought a Roland guitar synthesizer because I'm not the greatest at playing keyboards, and let's lay down some ideas and see what we come up with. Alright, so now I'm going to lay down some heavy guitar parts. I like to double the guitars on a lot of tracks. What I'll do is I'll use several different guitars, several different amps, play around with the sound. Sometimes I'll go direct and use a plug-in, but most of the time I'll use an all Class A tube amp like the one behind me. I'm going to start off with the Les Paul, try to get a kind of a heavy sound here. Okay, so now I've picked out a different guitar sound. I'm actually going to use a plug-in here just to give it some depth and some difference. I've got this Apollo Twin here, and it comes with some emulation plugins. And one of them is this Marshall Plexi plugin, which actually sounds quite fantastic. I don't use it for a lot of things, but it works well with this. Let's hear how that sounds. I think it'll be a nice contrast. When I spread them across the stereo image, they'll really sound cool together. A lot of times with recording, you just get an idea and you just try it, see if it works. I had the idea of using a slide on this one, so I'm going to try to do a little bit of, basic slide guitar, maybe use some effects, and see what comes out of it. Alright, so in a nutshell, that's how I put everything together. I think I've got most of the tracks of what I'm going to use. It's an experiment. You can go back and lay more tracks or delete some. I like to play several. A lot of times I'll get rid of something I don't like. I might cut it up a little bit, do some editing. I've gone in and done a little mixing on my own and put everything together, a little bit of editing, and got a quick mix going. This won't be the final mix on the record, but I'd like to take you out with a little bit of Imaginations Volume 2. This is Hummingbird. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Have a good one.